All right, awesome. Hey everyone, I am Josh Biggley. I'm an Ops Strategist at New Relic. I live on PEI, and I'm originally from Ontario. Don't hold the ladder against me at all. Yelmer, thanks so much for talking about SRE and error budgets and monitoring, because that is really the impetus for what I want to talk to you about today. Now, I framed this a little differently. Well, Yelmer was going into the details. I want to talk about the art and the science of observability and tie in the work that gets done by SREs, developers, operations folks in achieving this pinnacle of observability. Let's start off. First, wonderful safe harbor slide. You can read the entire thing. It basically says that although I do work for New Relic, I can't actually say things that will influence the stock market in any way, shape, or form, or the too long didn't read version. These are all my opinions and not necessarily those of our sponsors, or however that used to go when they used to be on TV. Personal bio. So again, Josh Biggley, I'm an ops strategist at New Relic. I've been here for about 15 or 16 months. Formerly worked for a Fortune 25 healthcare company, all from the luxury of my basement, or as my wife says, the lower level. It's not actually the basement. I've been a nerd for a long time. Here's the proof that I was a nerd. Yes, that is the computer club. That is me in the skinny puppy t-shirt and longish hair is awful. I've been for a long time trying to be a servant leader, really focused on the idea of complex systems and what that means. I'm also a bibliophile, numerophile, and quadophile. Before you call the police, it means I love books, numbers, and I love to collect quotes. Interestingly, that I'm here presenting to the Halifax. I can't code at all. I try really hard, and I just can't do it. My brain doesn't work that way. And as it says, I copy pasta badly too. And as I said, I'm also a former Ontarian from Windsor, best pizza in the world. Prove me wrong, but I now live on Prince Edward Island in Charlottetown. So employer shout out, I'm really grateful to work at New Relic. I was a former customer before I made the decision to leap to this side. It's the first time in nearly 25 years that I've not had to be on call. I love it. It's fantastic. I'm not the recipient of any of Yelmer's alerts at 3 a.m. So it's awesome. If you want to follow New Relic, you can check them out. I would highly encourage you to check out our new dev portal, as well as our open source portal. And if you are actually a developer, someone who can actually write code, not like me, go follow our Relicans. They are our developer relations team on both Twitter and on Twitch. And if you're really interested and you want to come work with me, you can go check out New Relic Careers. I want to start off by talking about the complexity, again, from an art perspective, from the art of observability. This is a great quote from M. Scott Peck that talks about our need to change the way we see the world. And that, for me, is really the power of observability. It allows us, as Peck says, to begin to think multidimensionally, to appreciate the fact that life is complex. And for me, life is technology. Two terms. I always start off my presentations by making sure that we all understand the same terms of reference. So monitor, as defined by the dictionary, is to surveil with continuous regular observation, signals, movements, or changes of state and quality. And observe is the acquisition of that information, the perception, and most important, at least for our context, is the recording of that data. Let's first begin by understanding what complexity is. I stumbled across this probably more than a decade ago. I'm sure there are at least one or two of you on the call today who know Rob Patterson, who used to live on PEI, now lives in Quebec. Rob was the one who introduced me to Cynefin. This Cynefin framework was started by a gentleman named Dave Snowden, who, when he was at IBM, and it's a Welsh word, and that's why Cynefin is not at all how it's spelled, but that's how it's said. It actually the definition for Cynefin comes from the Encyclopedia of New Zealand, and it expands on this with that quote at the end. And I like it because it talks about the place that we find to be our home. And that's what happened when I first saw monitoring nearly 25 years ago. Worked for Chrysler Corporation, saw an HP OpenView station, tells you how old I am, that I remember dedicated HP OpenView stations, and we weren't allowed to touch it. But I loved it. It was so amazing to me, and I became obsessed with monitoring enough that I've made it the focus of my career. What I'd like to do is explore this art of observability. I'm just going to move out of the way so I can see the entire screen. The way that we look at this Cynefin framework is by first acknowledging that there is confusion. There is something that we do not know. There is uncertainty in the world. The Cynefin framework is such that we're trying to define what our problem is. Is the problem part of the ordered world on the right-hand side of this interesting little swirl? Or is it a novel problem, something that we've never seen before and we're trying to understand it? What I'm going to do now is I'm going to step through each of the 4 quadrants, talking about what they are, and then I'm going to tie this into how we achieve observability from a systems perspective. First, in the bottom right are clear problems. Clear problems are already understood. The really intelligent people have solved those problems for us, and we know that when we look at the output, we immediately can assess and respond in a very scripted action. From a technology perspective, this would be like tier 1 call centers. You call in, hey, my password needs to be reset. They run through a pre-scripted response. Great, not a problem. I give the example of, hey, it's dark in this room. I'm going to turn the lights on and boom, lights come on. Great. I knew exactly how to solve this. Nobody needed to help me. These conditions rarely change. And in the context of observability, this is where our monitoring falls in. This is where we collect those signals. And as Yelmer pointed out, you can write rules that say, when X happens, take Y action. These are best practices. So when you hear someone say to you, oh, what are your best practices? They're really asking for, how do I solve the problems that are distinctly clear? In the complicated space, we run into some more challenging issues. Now, these are still well solvable. This is very much in the realm of our ordered challenge, or our ordered problems. Is the room dark? The light switch, it doesn't turn on. Well, what can we do? Now, there are some things that I might be willing to do that you're not willing to do. I mean, I might be willing to go down and flip the breaker on my breaker box, or open up, the socket and see if, the wires have come undone. What I'm not willing to do is to take apart my breaker box. That would require a professional. The solutions to complicated problems are, they are often known, but they're known by those who have expertise in the area. They still have to follow specific guidelines. That means I would call an electrician, somebody who had training and knew that they needed to shut off the main before they opened the circuit breaker box so that they didn't get electrocuted and sue me. Complicated problems get solved with best practices. The difference between best practices, with good practices, I said complicated are solved with best, and I will fix that before I publish these. Complicated problems are resolved with good practices. That means practices that in the hands of a trained professional can be implemented without much oversight. There are known rules and constraints, but it takes that professional persona to work through them. In the context of observability, we're talking about the collection of data like traces, logs, customized dimensional metrics or other data. In the top left-hand corner, we fall into the complex realm. In the complex realm, we discover innovation. Now, this is often the space that as engineers, we love to be. We love to be finding things that people have not yet discovered. We want to pull them apart and put them back together again. These complex problems require a high level of skill. It is not just doing what I do and doing copy pasta of code. It is actually inventing and creating new things. Complexity is where innovation lives, but innovation cannot stay in the complex realm. In the context of turning off and on our lights, hey, if our lights don't turn on and the light switch doesn't work and my breaker box is working just fine, what's the bigger issue? Maybe there's been a worldwide power outage. Maybe we've outstripped our ability to generate power, and we need engineers who are going to innovate and find new ways to generate sustainable power for us. Experimentation is the input. The reward is hopefully the resolution of a problem that can then be translated into the complex realm. The problem in the complex realm is that it requires significant investment of both time, intellect, and often money to solve problems. That is why, although innovation lives here, these exaptive practices, and that's kind of a funny word. So here's the definition for that funny word. Exaptive practices are a trait, feature, or structure that takes a function that where none previously existed, and that differs from its original function. So you're going to take components and put them all together and generate something that is brand new. In the context of observability, what does this mean? It is rapidly testing theorems with beneficial outcomes. Think of AI and ML. They are trying to solve for problems in the complex realm. Of course, once they've solved for them, we hope that they'll take them over to the complicated realm where you and I can operate on them with ease. The last realm is the most unnerving. This is chaos. Chaos, if we were to use the imagery of the light switch, would be the lights aren't turning on, and I turn on the light switch, and then suddenly smoke starts to pour from the outlet. That's a bad thing. Now, I've never experienced this in my life, but I immediately have to act. It may be that I turn off the light switch. It may be that I run downstairs and throw the main. It may be that I call 911. My only goal in a moment of chaos is to get out of that chaotic realm, either by jumping into that clear realm because I've immediately assessed, I know what the problem is, I take some actions, that puts me on a path to resolution, or to go clockwise and go back up into the complicated space. Chaos is not a place that you can exist for long term, and if you try to run in chaos, and this chaotic problems exist outside of technology, interpersonal relations, HR problems, finance problems. Do not ever let chaos take hold of your credit card. That is a bad idea. These chaotic problems require us to have novel practices. Nothing is off the table when it comes to getting ourselves out of this chaotic realm. In the realm of observability, systems, in order to move out of this chaotic realm in observability, you need a system that allows you to ask questions dynamically, that is using large amounts of data to give you insights that are both known and unknown. So where does that leave us? This is the full model, the full Knevin framework. Chaos, of course, as I said, is not sustainable. Failure will inevitably happen. And I should point out that there is although it doesn't look like it, there is a cliff here. You also cannot live forever in clear because there is no innovation. And if you are lulled into the false sense of complacency of always operating in clear, you will fall off the edge into chaos. And then you either have to try to find your way back into clear, which is extremely difficult, or you have to go back through the whole process. Think about pivoting in a startup, right? You think you know what you're doing, all of a sudden you found chaos, hop into this complex realm, out over here into complicated. Complexity is also not sustainable because the cost of living in a complex realm is simply too expensive. You want to go from complexity into complicated. Complicated is sustainable only when the value proposition is helping your customers, or whether internal or external, take these complicated problems and parse them into clarity. I pitch this to my customers as, we're trying to innovate here, we're trying to deliver our go-to-market here, and our customers are trying to implement here. Our value proposition is crossing this barrier, and is also crossing the barrier of complicated into clarity and implementing for our customers. So what does it mean to observe complexity? This is more the science side. This book, Patterns in Cognitive Systems, is a fairly heavy read, but I like to read that kind of thing, so it's all right. The base unit of analysis is the joint cognitive system, not people versus technology. And the key process is to study, model, and support is how people cope with complexity. I love that those last two statements, that this is not people versus technology, and systems require that we understand how people cope with complexity. Observability is not something that you buy. You can't walk into your local store and say, "Hey, can I just take a dose of observability for my environment?" It's like back when people used to sell ITIL, like it was something that you could purchase, and yet it's really a cultural change. What observability allows is the translation of complexity in the way that people perceive that complexity, and gives them the ability to ask the questions they need to so that they can articulate the responses. In some cases, those responses are well known. In other cases, those responses are not well known. And so we rely on the machines to give us the insights, hopefully, to get closer to a problem. In the end, it is always going to be the humans who decide, how am I going to act? How am I going to respond to these observations? Gartner, back in 2017, coined a phrase called AIOps. I actually like their 2017 definition better than I like their current definition. Gartner said that you had to have data collection, storage, an analytics engine, excuse me, a visualization layer, and that you had to have vendor-agnostic data ingestion. And they changed algorithmic IT operations to artificial intelligence for IT operations, and I was a little lost when they made that change just a few months later. Today, Gartner calls AIOps big data, machine learning, event correlation, anomaly detection, and causality determination, which I think is interesting. Here's the ultimate problem we have as practitioners. We have this estate of telemetry, and it includes metrics, dimensional metrics that Jelmer was showing us through Prometheus. It has events, things that happened, time-stamped occurrences of specific types, including the output of those conditions that Jelmer had defined. Those alerts don't necessarily need to go to a person. They get written into a system and they become an event, something that happened at a period in time. Logs, I love logs so much. I despise generating logs and having to manually parse through them, but I love the robust nature of logs. There's so much goodness in there. And if you're a developer, guarantee you write awesome logs. And then traces, again, can't write code, but when I look at traces, it lets me understand the complexity of a system, or at least respect the complexity of a system. So we've got this, what used to be called the 4 pillars of observability: metrics, events, logs, and traces. How are we going to pull them all together? Well, if you're like me, here's what you do. First, you build dashboards. The problem with dashboards is that they're limited in scope. It doesn't cover our full estate because we only focus on the things that truly matter to us. We focus on the quality of our curated KPIs, whether they are driven by the SLOs that we define. These would be the SLIs that Jelmer was talking about, or it might be things like amount of revenue that we are generating, or number of customers who are walking through our front door. Anything that we want to track can be put up on a dashboard. It does mean that we need to put eyeballs on it, though. So we often will take those KPIs from our dashboards and we'll build alerts. But this, again, is still within that realm of monitoring. This is, we take KPIs, we start to build the things that we think that we want to pay attention to. And I often kid with people, alerts are wonderful, except we build the alerts that we want to based on the KPIs, and then we do what Jelmer and I did, and I'm sure many others do, and we went and we read the Google SRE handbook. And Google says, well, you should also have these types of alerts. And then we show up at meetups and we talk about the alerts that we want, and the other people recommend alerts, and then suddenly you have way too many alerts. And you've created as much noise in your environment as your raw telemetry in some cases. The art of observability, or observability itself, really requires, in my mind, 4 things. It has to be telemetry agnostic. I don't care where your telemetry comes from. I don't care how you're collecting it. It can be SNMP, it can be WMI, it can be straight from your code, it can be logs, it can be dimensional metrics from Prometheus, it can be open telemetry. It does not matter where your telemetry comes from. observability requires data agnosticism. It also needs to be persona agnostic. It means that people like me, who've lived my entire career in the operations space, we need to be able to look at and understand the data as it comes in. Developers need to be able to understand the data. SREs, DevOps, our boss's boss, the CEO, there needs to be a space for all of them in observability, because observability is not just for technical people. It's not just business intelligence. It is how our system is. It is the state of being. Observability also needs to help us find the unknowns. This isn't just about what we know, what we think we know, what someone else told us we should know. This is about finding the things that are going on in our environment that we didn't even know we should be looking for. And finally, this should be about taking that complexity that we looked at through the Cynefin framework and distilling chaos all the way through to clarity. That's what observability needs to bring. Now, I would be remiss, of course, if I didn't talk about how I think you could get started in implementing observability. So observability for me looks kind of like this. First, it has to be easy to understand, zero config, other than sending your telemetry. It has to be open to third-party data and open data. What you're looking at here is a functionality in the New Relic platform called Lookout, which does statistical analysis, correlation with math that is, well, math that is more difficult than for me, but again, I failed math in grade 9. My guidance counselor told me after I graduated, he said, look, Josh, your math scores are so bad, you probably will never have a career in IT. What do you want to do in life? And I said, it's great, I want to be a lawyer. I have no interest in working in IT. Awkward, very awkward. That amount of math and processing brings us to this point of looking at data, having the machine help me discover the things that are going on in an environment, and then letting me drill into the details that matter to me, to my persona. How do you get started? Well, you can get started at New Relic, just newrelic.com. You can sign up for free. If you're an individual, throw data at this, up to 100 gigs a month. You get access to everything. If you want to throw more than 100 gigs of data at us a month, as long as you don't add more than that one user, 25 cents a gig. And what I'll say is, although this is not a sales pitch and not intended to be a sales pitch, if you have questions, reach out and ask. We're trying to build a more vibrant community and support the vibrant communities that already exist. It's why we've dedicated a developer relations team. It's why we've open sourced much of the code that we've written over the years. So please go check out our GitHub repo, look at the things that are there, participate, contribute, give feedback. Hell, we'll take criticisms as well. And if you're not doing anything on May 25th to the 27th, hopefully we can all travel again. I'd really like to see my son and daughter-in-law over in the HRM. You can join us at FutureStack, see presentations, maybe even this presentation, maybe slightly tuned. That's it. Great, thanks very much. I appreciate your time and giving me an extra 3 minutes over what Katie said was going to be the timeline. I'll stick around for any questions.